Welcome to the Nerd Party.
Hi, this is Nick Anastasiou, story editor on Star Wars The Clone Wars and Star Wars Bad Batch. And you are listening to Aggressive Negotiations.
Well, hello and welcome to Aggressive Negotiations, a slice of Star Wars heaven that you are always excited to be on. And as we found out, we are ranked number 24 in Star Wars podcasts out there out of a very long list. So thank you for that rating. We really appreciate it. And with me, as he is always, ranked number 1 in my heart, Jedi Master John Mills.
Oh, shucks, Matt. And let's point out that list that we were put on is 70 podcasts long, which means that whoever edited that list together had to listen to about 7 billion podcasts, because there are many Star Wars podcasts out there. We appreciate each and every one of you who has chosen to listen to Aggressive Negotiations. We have a lot of fun here. We love having fun, and we love delivering the show. So thank you for making it worth our while to show us that you think it's worth your while to lend us your ears every so often. Thank you very much.
Well, I am just so excited that people are listening. Of course, they can find us all over social media. We're on X, Twitter, at the Jedi Masters. Our entire network is on Instagram at The Nerd Party. You can also find us online at thenerdparty.com. And we're on Facebook at facebook.com/The Nerd Party. So check all of those places out. We would really appreciate it. So this topic actually comes from a book that I have been reading for work, and it was called Practicing Affirmation. And interestingly enough, the book is all about this idea of how giving people words of affirmation are incredibly helpful in the relationships we have. And one of the examples that they used was actually the relationship between Anakin and Palpatine in the prequels. And the fact, especially we see this, right, in episode 3. Palpatine is continuously giving Anakin affirmation and, of course, flattery mixed in as well. And in doing so, he is undercutting the relationship that Anakin has with the Jedi, who seem to be incapable of giving him any compliments whatsoever, except for once in a blue moon. So this is the question I wanted to pose to you, John. Do you think that if the Jedi, and specifically Obi-Wan, had taken an approach with Anakin to where instead of always harping on the things he's doing wrong, working on affirming the things he's doing right, instead of leading with the stick, they led with the carrot, that would have helped Anakin turn out to be a different type of person?
You know, I'm not going to pillory Obi-Wan so much as I love to get under your skin, because we do see Obi-Wan on screen providing love and support and affirmation for Anakin. Mm-hmm. He's very tough on him in episode 2. Mm-hmm. That is true.
That is, yes.
But in episode 3, he is very supportive. They're more equals than anything. So what I will do is I will take Obi-Wan and I will couch it in Obi-Wan's greatest flaw as a teacher is that Anakin needs a father figure. I think that affirmation from a parental figure carries more weight than affirmation from a sibling or a friend. We all want mom and dad to love us and to tell us that we're doing well and that they're proud of us. Anakin's quote-unquote dad figure is trying more, and not even trying more, is naturally more like a buddy, like a brother. You were my brother, Anakin. I loved you. They were brothers. What Anakin needed was a father. So I think that's the important aspect here with Anakin's need for affirmation, is the father figures, let's say Yoda, Mace Windu, other members of the Order, especially on the Council, they're the ones that are way too harsh. The authority figures in his life are way too harsh. Now, again, that ties into the fact that Obi-Wan is not seen by Anakin as an authority figure per se. He's seen as somebody he respects. He's seen as somebody he will listen to, but not an authority figure in the same way a parent is. So I think that I would pair it up with, yes, affirmation is important, but who the affirmation comes from is just as important.
That's that's really, really interesting. The reason that I'm somewhat shocked by what you just said is because as I was thinking about this, and this might shock you, I was harder on Obi-Wan, especially when I think of the way he's acting with Anakin in episode 2. And I think that what it comes down to me is that Obi-Wan is falling into that trap that we all tend to do when somebody around us, especially someone we're in some sort of authority figure relationship with, who is acting up or not acting the way we want them to, where we only focus on the negative in what they're doing. And so all the words that we say to them are negative. We're never saying anything positive to them. And in the end, what happens is that just turns into a dripping faucet where it just becomes obnoxious and annoying and something we turn off listening to. And I think, so when I was seeing this in the book and then putting it into the context of what I had read in the book so far, and then the rest of it, I really did come to the conclusion that I do believe that if the Jedi themselves, in some ways, because I think this, especially with the prequel Jedi, we tend to kind of see this, right? They have become so dogmatic and so stuck in their ways that when somebody doesn't live up to the standard, right, the way they seem to deal with everybody is just to pick at where they're not living up to the standard, instead of also holistically building that person up, because everybody has good qualities and bad qualities, and we all have things we have to learn. And yet they seem to focus too much on the negative, which seems so interesting because that's it almost seems like a touch of the dark side, right? Only focusing on the negative.
I understand what you're saying. I don't dismiss it. And yes, I agree. We've both mentioned episode 2 at this point, where Obi-Wan is more than a little harsh with Anakin in episode 2. But I'm saying by episode 3, we see that their relationship has evolved.
Yes. Yeah.
But by that point, you know what? Let's blend them together. Let's say that by that point in episode 3, the damage is already done, which leads back to your point about a dripping faucet. Maybe by episode 3, things are quote unquote better, but Obi-Wan, that dripping faucet has undercut wherever they're at that point. Even if you weigh in the Clone Wars stuff, Obi-Wan still has a very constant note of, oh, Anakin, you could have done better. Oh, Anakin, come on. What I want to do, because you're talking about, is this endemic in the Jedi, is I think that there's also something where the Jedi might not learn their lesson because there are very resilient people within there. Where I'm going with this is Dooku is trained by Yoda. Dooku trains Qui-Gon. You and I think most fans would agree, that negative sentiment, if it existed, which I would say in Tales of the Jedi, you can see very much Dooku carries himself with an air of, he might not say something cutting to you, but if you don't quite make the example he's leading, you're going to know it. And it's not going to necessarily be pleasant. But I want to ask you, do you think that is a way to, was Dooku a better teacher than he intended to be? Or that other Jedi were, because he didn't give voice to his disappointment? He would say to Qui-Gon, oh, that's a great point. You're turning into a great man, all of those sorts of things. But then if Qui-Gon fell short, I think you get this air that Dooku would just say, oh, do you think that was best? Okay. And basically reflect it back. So is it ironic then that maybe Dooku, even though he falls to the dark side, did what you're talking about, where it was the more practicing affirmation, he only gave voice to things in such a way that supported Qui-Gon's better aspects, encouraged him along the path.
Yeah, I mean, I was thinking about this because as you were talking, I was thinking, okay, Dooku has Yoda as a master. And one of the things I'm always struck by about Yoda is the way in which he treats everybody with such respect. And especially, I think of that episode of the Clone Wars ambush, right? Mm-hmm. Where it's the first episode that we see of the television show when it comes on the air, and he's talking to the clones, and he's talking about how they're all people in their own right. They all have their own personalities. Basically telling them they all matter, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think what struck me with that was he has the ability, it seems like, to actually reach in and do that thing, right? What we're talking about, the affirmation of the best character qualities of a person that they should be striving for as a Jedi or just as a person, and to then build those up. And it almost seems like, he must have been able to pass some of that on to Dooku in some ways, because I think, like you said, Qui-Gon seems to be a character who also has the ability to maybe see the best in people instead of the worst. And so, and it brings me back to the thought process, too, of like a subject that we have talked about. Why weren't other Jedi, especially like Yoda, more in charge of training Anakin? And if they had been there to be those type of figures in his life, good cop, bad cop, good parent, bad parent kind of thing. I think as I watch Anakin, he's obviously a character who's just kind of starved for affection, and he's starved for his desire for people to love him and care about him. And also I think to feel like he is worth something, I mean,
sure.
And so I really see that this could have had an incredible impact. And I think that if Obi-Wan and the Jedi themselves had been more loving towards Anakin holistically and saw his good qualities as well as his bad qualities, and actually focus on those good qualities, especially the way that Palpatine is able to do that, except not do it in a flattery sense, but do it in a sense that is actually true, right? The character qualities that Anakin has that are actually good, that, are commendable, and point those out to him. I don't know if Palpatine would have been able to get under his skin as much.
You are correct. Like at a baseline, you and I, any disagreement we have isn't even really a disagreement. We're sort of trying to figure out how the Jedi could have done it differently. Completely agree with you. If somebody comes in and they tell you, they give you the type of attention you want, even if that is a toxic person, you will glom on to them and you will love them because they are giving you the type of affirmation you want. Completely agree. Absolutely rock solid premise. To speak to the Jedi part of it, I think that it's not an excuse, but I think it's a reason that the Jedi are the way they are with Anakin in specific. I think Anakin is a special case. I don't think that all of the Jedi were this way with their Padawans. I don't think that's possible. Although I would say Anakin at first is that type of teacher to Ahsoka. He softens.
Yes.
But at first he is that way with Ahsoka.
Yeah.
Always constantly just harping on her and being tough on her.
Yeah.
And there is actually that great Tales of the Jedi episode where you see him being excessively difficult with her in that training exercise about deflecting attacks from living beings.
Yep.
And she gets discouraged. Anakin comes in and says, I'm doing this because this could save your life. It's because I love you that I'm doing this.
Exactly. Yep.
Maybe Anakin doesn't get enough of that explanation given to him.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe what it is again, the weight of the prophecy.
Yes.
He's supposed to be the chosen one.
Yes.
So everybody, I would say, is being excessively negative because, one, I will cop to this with my own kids. I get called out on it every so often, where my children will call me out every so often, and I have to say to them, well, I'm being this tough on you because I know what you're capable of. And so I'm not accepting anything less than that. But then I understand I have to readjust and all of those sorts of things. Is it possible that when the Jedi come to accept in one degree or another that Anakin is the quote unquote chosen one, there's a part of them that is angry at Anakin because he is not delivering that solution in a quick enough timeline? He's the chosen one. He's going to bring balance. And he's 20. Why haven't you brought balance yet? He's 21. There's a war. The hell, man.
Yeah.
Right? How are you going to bring... Okay, fine. Solve the war. Okay. And that builds and builds and builds where everybody's saying, what chosen one, he hasn't done... And maybe there's a baseline resentment. What do you think about that? Where there's like, whether they're aware of it or not, there's a baseline, not in Yoda, but in a lot of Jedi, this sense of disappointment that's informing the way they're interacting with him.
I mean, it could be. That is a really interesting thing. And I mean, we've talked about it, I think, plenty of times. The one of the big issues is just letting somebody know that you believe they're special. And that creates a whole other, psychological issue. And I think maybe even letting other people know, other than only the council should know this. Anakin should know this, and no other Jedi should know this. So, I do think that could definitely have a big part of this. I think you could be right. There could be resentment. I mean, you could even see maybe, somebody like a Pong Krell feeling this way about somebody like an Anakin or whatever, and be like, oh, well, if he's not the only one who's special, and so, yeah, I can absolutely see that being the case. I think one of the interesting things about this is that there are plenty of places where the whole idea of the carrot and the stick, right? The stick is always there, but the whole thing with the horse is that he can't see the stick, right? And so what's there and constantly motivating him is the promise of a carrot. And in some ways, I think that's the way that, it comes with this subject of Anakin. Anakin was a character, I think, who needed the carrot in front of him, and the stick would be there when needed. But I think what he needed as a person was more tender, loving care than kind of this legalistic rule following. And a little bit of room to be able to find himself. And I think the place where, and it's not Obi-Wan's fault, but in all honesty, completely, because I think he's trying to do the best job how he knows to do it. And he's dealing with a situation he's not quite ready for. And the beauty is like you mentioned, Anakin kind of shows where I think he learned that lesson of what he needed, and he's the one who then gives that to Ahsoka when he says to her in the Clone Wars film, you wouldn't have made it as Obi-Wan's Padawan, but you might just make it as mine. And why? It's because he's willing to give her space to figure out how she needs to be taught, right? He's willing to give her space to allow him to learn, what do you need most, and then how can I give that to you, which makes it really interesting. And I think that's one of the things where, because of his experience, he was able to see that. You know, Obi-Wan doesn't have that experience in that sense. He only knows what his master did. He's also dealing with the trauma of losing his master and then having this thrust upon him before he's really kind of ready for it. You know, I think in many ways, Anakin was actually ready to train Ahsoka. I think, Obi-Wan, I think Yoda realizes that, right? And the reason he's ready is because he also is ready to kind of really hopefully learn the lesson that Yoda does want to teach him of letting go, which he was going to have to do one day with this character. But that's a completely different place than where Obi-Wan was, right? He wasn't completely ready for this, but he has this thing thrust upon him that he's not quite ready to handle. And that makes it really fascinating because Anakin is actually not a bad master to Ahsoka, as we've talked about. And I think a lot of the lessons that he learned and he kind of intuitively feels in his heart that he wanted, he then gives to her. And it's actually kind of really beautiful.
I agree. It is. Lovely points, all of those. And I think that it's a great point to go out on, while also teasing maybe a future topic for us to discuss, is Obi-Wan, to your point, wasn't ready for his master to die like he did in front of him. It's very traumatic. And then he's thrust into this role after defeating the first Sith Lord that anybody has encountered in a very long time, knowingly encountered in a very long time, defeats him handily. And Anakin is given a Padawan to teach him how he has to let go. And that's supposed to be part of why Obi-Wan is ready to have Anakin. And maybe Obi-Wan's being difficult on Anakin is because he's still processing. He's still unsure of where he is, but also he never lets Anakin go. He never has to let Anakin go. Anakin becomes a knight and they're still going around as if they're teacher and pupil, master and apprentice.
Right. Well, and just let me interject real quick, because as you're saying that, I'm also thinking he also has the added weight of that this is the possible chosen one.
Right.
So he's like, I can't screw this up. So you think about the actual pressure that then he's under. It's no wonder that he turns into somebody who is working very diligently to try and shift Anakin's way of thinking and doesn't quite know the best way to do that.
Now, remember also that it's as we're having this discussion, it's great because I just rewatched the last episode of season 1 of the Clone Wars, because now that we're nearing the end of Rebels, I'm trying to get my youngest to start watching the Clone Wars with me, to be like, oh, you know, we can keep the fun going. God bless you, Lucasfilm Animation, for so much great content. Just that's a parenthetical. But Anakin mentions in the last episode of that season that he's supposed to be going on a 2-week meditative retreat. And it seems to me that we're sitting here and we're talking about all of the ways that the practicing affirmation would have helped Anakin. And I agree that it would have. Absolutely, they were too harsh on Anakin. But let's not discount the fact that Anakin has a baseline immaturity, because instead of going on that 2-week meditative retreat, he's trying to talk Padme into going off and having a pseudo honeymoon trip with him. And I think it's important to couch all of our discussion in the fact that Anakin, and I think you'll agree with me, I know you'll agree with me on this, Anakin is still baseline responsible for his own decisions and actions.
Yes. Yeah.
Practicing affirmation is a way to support and lift someone up. But at the end of the day, Anakin is responsible for where he ends up, which I think is actually, maybe this is one last point to hit. We have our practicing affirmation discussion. We have our who's responsible point here. And in the Obi-Wan series, I credit them for the moment where Vader says to Obi-Wan, "You didn't kill Anakin Skywalker. I did."
Mm-hmm.
And
yeah.
So there's sort of an odd thing here in the context of this discussion that we can sit there and we can talk about practicing affirmation, but somehow in that moment, Anakin was, quote unquote, Anakin was mature enough to realize that he was responsible for his own downfall, which really creates an odd philosophical moment to ponder about Vader as a whole.
I think what it does help us do as we're having this discussion, I think one of the most helpful things about this is it actually does help us to be able to see some of the ways in which the Jedi had, in some ways, kind of lost some things. And I do think in some ways, some of that lostness, it was actually that dogmatic nature in them that had them kind of almost trying to beat the truth into people instead of finding some sort of, I don't know, different way to do it. And I think it's almost like this. And again, it comes back to the difference with I was talking between Obi-Wan and Anakin and the way they train their Padawans, is that saying there's just one way to do it. That dogmatism became like, this is how we train, this is what we do, and, we don't really deviate from that. And the interesting thing is obviously we saw other masters and apprentices on the show, and the Clone Wars specifically, I think of like Barriss Offee and Luminara Unduli being on the show, and they have different styles. But yeah, I don't know. I do think maybe this is just a place where the Jedi had maybe lost something, and Anakin does kind of become one of the people who suffers from that. And not just him, but I mean, obviously Barriss Offee also turns, right? So Anakin's not the only one who makes a turn because of experiences with the Jedi. So it seems like maybe this problem, as we're talking about it, it's a little more pronounced than just, Obi-Wan and Anakin. It's a problem with across the order at this point, and so yeah, it's interesting to me, like this. It goes to show, and we were kind of talking about this before we started recording in some ways, but like Star Wars from Lucas and his thought process behind the series was because he's basing it on mythology and all these different mythologies and the way in which those mythologies help tell us stories about the human condition. And so it's no wonder then that a subject matter like whether or not, affirmation could have helped a character become a different character, because that's part of the human condition, and I just, again, that's just really interesting to me, And so I kind of love it.
With good reason. And this is another one of those topics where thank you for bringing this one in, because this is another one of those ones that reminds me the prequels came out decades ago, and we can still have rich conversations like this about them because Lucas doesn't sit there and try to tell us what the answer is. He shows us what the outcome is if you do it in a selfish fashion, but he doesn't pretend to think, oh, well, I can tell you this is what the Jedi should have done. He leaves us here to say, well, what could they have done better here? And so I love this topic. But what I would truly love is for people to reach out to you online and to ask you any further questions about affirmation or practicing affirmation that they would have. So where can they find you online?
Well, all over social media under the name Matt Rushing02. If I'm on that platform, that's my name. You can also, of course, find me here on the network with the completed show. I will post about every single chapter of the Harry Potter series, one chapter at a time. I'm over on the TFM network with a bunch of shows. The 602 Club is a great place to hang out where we talk about all of these franchises that we love. Plus, a ton of Star Trek talk over there with my friend Chris Jones. So check us out over there. But John, maybe people want to get your Padawan training advice. Where would they find you?
Oh, advice? No. I just need an editor for my book, My Padawan and Me, A Several-Year Journey by Jedi Master John Mills. It's going to be a bestseller, trust me. You can find me online as Kessel Junkie, and you can find me right here on the network, co-hosting a show called House Lights. We have a lot of fun, especially when there's a director that one of us has hit where they haven't seen everything, because that leads to a lot of hilarity. But Master Rushing, we have to go back and we have to answer for our actions here. I feel like they're being a little too harsh on us, but regardless, I guess it's time to close these negotiations.
John, negotiations are closed.
Join the revolution. Join the Nerd Party.